Hello.
Phil, there it is. How's it going?
I'm good, man. I got flustered at first because I forgot they shut down Hangouts for us here in favor of Slack like a year ago. But I just logged into like another account and it seemed to work.
Great.
And then maybe some weird disclaimer about like you're being recorded or something. So I'm on the internet. You still hear me?
Yep. Okay, so
Screen share, showcase, all these buttons. Oh, I see chairs. Also,
okay, Phil, we just got a few more minutes, about 3 more minutes, and we'll get going.
Cool. I'm trying to figure out how to see. Oh, hey, there's everyone.
So, Phil, how's the weather in New York?
Not as bad as Chicago.
It's in the teens here, so it's not terrible, but it's definitely.
Yeah, I think we're in single digits. The challenge is everyone here is just angrier all the time to begin with, so it feels worse. Supposed to be like a totally ridiculous proposition to ask people to just move closer to your computer.
Right. Did you say you want to have people move closer?
Yeah, I would understand why they wouldn't.
We'll see. Is anybody interested in moving a little closer to Phil?
None.
There is, and actually, in their defense, it is kind of a large room. So
yeah, I know.
There's if you remember your days.
I do. And we believe a lot in density here, so we don't do rooms like that anymore. The things that feel sparse feel foreign.
Okay, so I think we're ready to go. Everybody, this is Phil Kirschner. He's WashU class of 02, if I'm correct.
That is right. Yeah.
And he has been in a number of different parts of the industry, so I think it'll be pretty interesting to hear as he transitions between them. And he's from New York originally, so any of you New Yorkers out there certainly will appreciate that.
Woo! Yeah.
So take it away, Phil.
Thanks. So just around you 15 minutes of just high-level intro, and then we'll see what kind of questions we've got and go from there.
Sounds good.
Sounds good. Excellent. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you to you, I guess, and to Dante for inviting me. It's really Excited to get to talk to anyone from the school I loved so much. So as Dante said, I was a 2002 computer science graduate. Born and raised in New York City. Going to St. Louis was definitely a departure from the norm for me. Always knew I wanted to be in computer science. You know, third grade, fourth grade, I was like the one kid who had a computer, so that path was destined, I think, pretty early on. Dropped history in high school for computer science. I guess the language of the day then. Dante, the last guy was doing COBOL. Dante.
Oh, I'm sorry, what?
I said the last alum was talking about COBOL, I think is his first language.
Oh, yeah, yeah, COBOL was his first language, correct.
Yeah, yeah, not that old. I think the first one I ever touched in high school was Pascal, so that's like the one step after COBOL before, you know, Java or anything else. But started learning to code in high school, so knew I wanted to do computer science, fell in love with WashU, applied early, and went. I'd say that like throughout my class career, the things that I am probably most thankful that I took were in two buckets. So like assuming the first year or two were pretty prescriptive, what was kind of CS 101, 102, I think now Dante said is 130, 132. Yep. Took both those courses freshman year, ended up being a teaching assistant for CS 101 or 102, I can't remember now, for basically the rest of my tenure at WashU. But enjoyed probably two other categories of classes within the computer science department the most. The first was like artificial intelligence and robotics. And the second were a series of classes that I think were actually part of the engineering management school primary curriculum, not undergraduate, that were much more focused on how sort of technology and development happened like in the real world, very like as close to what I think of as a business school class, like case study oriented instead of all development, which is all to say, like, I knew I wanted to stay close to technology, but I was pretty certain that I didn't want a pure career like in development. So one end of that spectrum, spending time thinking about like how technology does and doesn't work well in a large company. And then the artificial intelligence and robotics classes, not necessarily because they were the most like hardcore algorithmic kind of courses. I remember, I don't remember specifically, but like things that I didn't feel were as relevant to me because I knew I didn't want to go fully into development. But those classes definitely taught me something differently about like, how to think about like data differently. And I'm sure now that there are courses much more oriented around data science or data analytics that didn't exist back then, given how like important of a career path it is. But having teachers who basically preached like that there are so many different ways to solve a problem. I found those courses like much more enriching to me than any of the standard set. Anyway, what really defined, like, I guess my trajectory out of school is that the 2 summers before I graduated, I interned at the same company twice, which was Ernst & Young, the consulting company back in New York. I got that job through like friends of friends, networking, got added to their like summer analyst program, which is dominated by like tax and accountants, but they hired a very limited number of technologists. And on that very first summer, very fortuitously, I was put into a group that basically did technology risk management, like information security audits and helping companies understand both like information and hardcore like technology risk issues. I had learned a little bit of that on my own, in large part by like trying to build and run a Linux machine of my own like volition, trying to learn everything like hands-on about maintaining a server and firewall rules and basic network architectures. Which I'll admit, like I sort of taught myself. I didn't learn specifically in classes. I don't know if that's sort of available now, but I had enough like hands-on knowledge to to get the job, but then being an intern in basically an information security function in the summers of 2000 and 2001 ended up being really like fortuitous, because the fall of my recruiting year, like as a senior, was September 11th. And every job that I like thought I might have gotten in an accounting firm, or even going back to Ernst & Young, like all that evaporated. As many jobs related to like professional services and financial services went away in New York, because there was a huge like pullback and all the concerns, obviously, after 9/11, and it really rocked those industries in this city in particular. But like cyber crime and information security all of a sudden became super, super popular. Not that it hadn't been important, but there was a big pivot. And my father was the first one to basically say, you know, you've got some of the security stuff on your resume as you're looking for a full-time job, but it's buried way down at the bottom. You should just like invert your resume and put that first. And that basically worked. So I got accepted to the technology analyst or associate recruiting program at a bank that is now called Credit Suisse, one of the world's sort of largest financial services firms, to go directly into their information security team as an analyst. So I did that for about 5 years, never developing, but spent most of my time doing risk assessment work with development and infrastructure teams. Like the application that you're building, you're thinking about authentication kind of the wrong way, you should do it this way. That partner that you're working with, you're trading information or sending information out that you shouldn't be, or you're doing it in an unsecure way. Let me help you do it this way. A lot of orientation with new hires, like every Monday morning, 50 people started from all over the bank, and I had to like stand in front of them after lunch and do the like, please don't share your passwords dance, which was a really challenging way of learning about public speaking. But a lot of like education, training, and awareness and assessment around risk. So never developing, but I realized that I had a lot of credibility with people who were developers and engineers by saying like, I have the same educational experience as you do, basically. So I did that for 5 years, and then through an internal contact at the bank, completely pivoted to a job in a group called expense management, another very like externality-driven decision. So 2001, September 11th happened. All of a sudden, security was all the rage. 2007, 2008, the like housing crisis and financial correction that came with it happened. So for many large companies, saving money was like all the rage. So someone I knew internally was like, hey, I'm part of this group that's trying to change the way that the bank thinks about what we spend money on. Would you come work for me? And I said, you know, I know nothing of like accounting and finance. I think I maybe took personal finance at WashU, but like, that's it. And he's like, that doesn't matter. Like, I can teach you the dollars and cents side of it. But what's interesting is we're trying to move the needle on like non-commoditized expenses around consulting and professional services. So like, you know, if I buy pencils, you buy pencils, it's the same thing. It's very easy to understand. But for things like advice and data services, it's every invoice, every service, every decision is very different. So we basically said it's a data problem. Like getting our hands around years and years of expenses and trying to triangulate, like, where did it come from? Are there common vendors, common goods, common people in the organization that are driving this? And like, that's where I need your help. Even though it took me very far away from sort of the technology base, it was all sitting on that same underlying theme of like data-oriented decisions and process change with the information that I had at hand. Did that for 4 or 5 years. Spent a year working in London, covering for a colleague who's on maternity leave. Was fortunate enough to get a sabbatical for a few months to travel, which was amazing, and I highly recommend. But then when I came back, really was the last turning point that set me on the journey that I'm on now, which is that the head of the group that I was already in, this expense management function, said, our CFO has been convinced that the way we structure our physical offices isn't working anymore. Someone has proven to him that when you look around, there's a ton of empty seats, not unlike the room that you're sitting in. Half the people at this bank are now, more likely to go and leave instead of leaving Credit Suisse for Goldman Sachs, like are more likely to leave and want to go work for Google or another technology firm because of what they're seeing in those offices. The fact that they are basically technologists and not bankers. New technologies were available, new expectations around flexibility, all this put together that there had to be a different way thinking about the office. And they were starting a project to explore what that might be. And I was asked if I wanted to join. So I said yes. What we ended up doing was in 3 different countries, piloting very small office spaces, like 200 people, testing concepts around what's called free address or activity-based working, which basically means instead of I come into the office and I sit at my desk or my cubicle or whatever that has my name on it, that the world is my oyster. Like I can do anything I want. Sort of the student lounge version for the office with mix and match of private spaces, open spaces, very structured, formal workstations, much more open, like couches and everything in between, with a lot more technology, a lot more experience, which had a very net positive result on the people working there and was much more attractive, frankly, to people like you. And all while actually saving a lot of money. Because you go from a situation where for maybe an office of 100 people, there's 100 desks and offices for those people, and then a lot extra because every company in the world is planning to grow, or they've got summer interns and they took a 10-year lease that they can't do much with. So they've got a lot of just waste. And even with those 100 desks and offices for the 100 people that are there, on any given day, maybe 60, 70, or 80 of those people even show up, which leads to this complete lack of use and therefore lack of energy or lack of productivity or anything. So even though these environments were newer, nicer, more technical, higher experience, because they're shared by the occupants, for that same population of 100 people, you maybe only have 60, 70, 80 seats officially, which are much more highly utilized by the people who do show up, with all sorts of ancillary and diverse different places to work. So really fascinating experience, quantitatively proved to work really well. So my team over the following sort of 3 to 4 years grew it from those 3 couple pilots to what is now a very large global program, 20,000 people in, I don't know, 7 or 8 different countries and large offices that are completely shared and look much more like something that you would see at a technology company than at a bank. And then I guess the last 2 hops, and I'll take a breath. Once I got over a major project in New York where I was based for the mobility program, and I didn't want to wait around for the next 5 years until something else happened, I left to join a real estate services company called Jones Lang LaSalle, or JLL. If you've never heard of them, now that you think about it, you will notice that they're on buildings all over the world. But I went to do basically what I was doing internally at Credit Suisse as a consultant. So telling other companies and helping them think through this problem of why isn't my space working? Why isn't it utilized well? Why isn't it attractive to the talent that I want to hire? Why aren't my people more productive? So on and so forth, and helping them do the same kind of research that my former employer had done at the beginning of their process, all the way up through the design of those programs, helping transition employees into new ways of working, and eventually measuring the success and the outcomes of those programs. Did that for 2.5 years, and then was starting to learn a little bit more about the company where I work now, WeWork, which it sounds like from the survey, Dante, that you sent, there's pretty low familiarity with us at the moment. Is that true?
I think so. A few more rolled in, but the general consensus was not very many people knew a lot about it.
Great. So WeWork is now the second highest valued private company in the United States, second to Uber. We're a 9-year-old company that started with the basic premise that it is better for people to, instead of like small companies and solo entrepreneurs like who are working in Starbucks and in their house and in really terrible places around the city, that it would be better for them to kind of like work together, and it would be more advantageous for them financially, and also from an experience perspective, to have somebody who could provide that common shareable space. So like the industry is broadly known as co-working. Is that word more than WeWork? Like maybe a little bit familiar or familiar-ish?
Anybody familiar with co-working?
Is that mostly like shaking of heads now?
Yeah, not looking so good.
Okay, good. So we'll go back. Co-working as a principle is basically like, again, if I'm a small company, I have two options for myself. Either like work in somebody's living room, or we fight for space at Starbucks, or we have to take a lease, which is like a really prohibitively expensive thing. And it's also really difficult to then design space and maintain space. And there were a few companies that came along, WeWork being one of them, to lean into this need by building it off. So like WeWork takes a lease for a building, let's say, provides different shapes and sizes of small suites within it. If you think of it like a little bit more like a hotel. So hotel rooms of different shapes and sizes for different companies of shapes and sizes, but also the ability for everyone in the hotel to share the central amenities. So big, like very highly designed, like social and communal spaces, meeting rooms of different shapes and sizes that you can leverage. Free coffee, water, beer, wine, whatever, like a community team that is dedicated to making that experience a positive one for their employees, and then like events that are happening all the time. And in these environments, we found early on not just positive feedback about the design of the experience, but actually these companies were like finding really useful ways of doing business with each other. If I'm a writer and I get like a freelance gig to do some kind of a website, and I'm like, well, shit, like I can write all this stuff, but I don't know the first thing about web design. You can effectively post to the community and say, is anyone out there like a designer that may want to like buddy up with me? Or I have a small company and we're looking for a travel agent. Is anyone out there a travel agent? Anyone out there an attorney or whatever? And studies over time found that like a huge percentage of our members were actually doing business with and helping each other over and above all the sort of social and communal benefits that they got of being together. So that's this basic principle around co-working, and the difference for WeWork versus all of the other players in this space is the sheer scale of the operation and the technology that we have thrown behind it. So WeWork had basically doubled in size of our portfolio every year for 9 years. We started in New York with one location, one became two, to sort of, 8, 10, 50, 200. Like we left last 2 years ago now, 2017, with about 200 locations. I don't remember how many cities or countries, but we finished December of this last year with 450 locations, 100 cities, 26 or 7 countries. And we're building about 2 million square feet of space, 20 to 40 locations per month now. So like in the entirety of 2018, we opened more physical space than we had in the previous 7 years put together. And our employee population has done basically the same thing. So I joined in mid-2017. I should say now, like I interviewed here by accident. I had no idea that I was interviewing. I never had a job description. And this company has never seen my resume. And my former employer isn't even on my resume as like evidence that I wasn't even looking for a job. That change alone, coming from two very large, like 80,000 person companies where I wore a suit most of the time, to being in jeans and a t-shirt in an office that has like dogs roaming around and beer on tap, was a very interesting transition, to say the least. So I'll put that aside for a second. But, yeah, we work under the covers as basically a technology organization masquerading as a real estate company. And the last big shift for us in kind of 2 years ago was going from all small companies and single individuals to where large companies have come to us and are now taking a pretty significant amount of space. So about a third of our members are large companies, big, huge names, Fortune 500 firms. I think we're doing business with about 30 or 40% of the Fortune 500. We started coming in taking little suites like anybody else. Then half floors, whole floors, whole buildings, IBM, Facebook, Amazon, a bunch of these companies have come and taken entire buildings to us at one fell swoop. And then we've leveraged all of our lessons learned and the ability to design and build space that quickly in the last year to take what we know and being able to go to these clients in their premises. So like conceivably, if WashU was to call us up and say, hey, like, we don't love our student center, what do you think? Like we could conceivably come and do all of the consulting, design, construction, and operation of that space. Bringing all the magic sort of from our normal co-working sites into a company or a school. So that's newer, but that's the journey in 20 minutes or so, and I'll stop and take a breath.
So just real quick, Phil, I think probably the closest thing locally we have is the Cortex Innovation District. I'm not sure if you've heard of that, Phil. That we have the Cambridge Innovation Center. I think there's at least one other company that does it, but the 4240 building, for example, which is towards the hospital, Barnes-Jewish Hospital, has companies like MasterCard and Boeing. Microsoft, I think, just built a thing there. But the goal is there's a bunch of small companies like a startup I was at that are 10-person companies, and then there are larger companies that have kind of, again, like innovation things. So a team of 10 people from a MasterCard, is supporting potentially ventures for those startups.
Yeah, and that kind of incubation is like those incubators and accelerators. We have a brand called WeWork Labs that does a lot of that. We do it sort of out of the goodness of our hearts and wanting to build brand awareness for us and fuel growth for those companies. In that case where it's like a MasterCard branded or sponsored in a venture, there's usually like money happening behind the scenes. Like they have some kind of stake or right of first refusal with those companies. Were they to build the next big thing, they probably curate the audience pretty heavily. So that it's like financial technologies or healthcare technologies or whatever it is, the partners. But yeah, that like it is a related industry. The use of providing space is a very visceral like way to get someone's attention. You see it, gyms here in New York City are starting to be like, hey, after your workout, we've got a workspace. Please hang out and buy a $15 juice. Hotels more and more like, please linger in my lobby. I don't care if you're staying here or not. Maybe you'll buy a coffee. Maybe you'll stay here one day. Bank branches, like, come ask us about a checking account, but also we have like Wi-Fi and coffee, and maybe you'll hang out here. There's something about that like in-person experience that's very strong with us, especially as we're like increasingly disconnected from the rest of the world, spending our time like online and with our faces in our phones. We believe strongly in the power of like being together, and that's where the magic happens. And the challenge for most large companies is that their offices are terrible, and they don't know how to make it not terrible.
Great, thanks, Phil. Does anybody have any questions for Phil? Anybody break the ice?
It's like only 4:30.
Always hard to see at the first question.
I'm super surprised, like selfishly, that the familiarity with WeWork was so low. We're on the news all the time.
Anybody from New York City? What? Nobody's from New York City.
No. Wow.
55 of you.
Nice.
Anybody from New York State? All right, we got one guy. Is anybody from the East Coast? There we go. Okay, finally, East Coast. That's what we need to do. So can you tell us, Phil, how you got your job at WeWork? You mentioned that you sort of didn't have an interview, didn't have a resume, which frankly I love, but I suspect it was related to some networking that you did, or just
yeah. I mean, I came in because like my clients were asking me about WeWork. My consulting clients were like, "What's this thing that's happening over there? Everyone keeps telling us about WeWork." And I had been to ones in New York, but I didn't really know the story. And a guy had left my old company to come work here. So he invited me for coffee, and then I like bumped into someone with him that was more important. And he was like, "Hey, you guys should talk." And I'm sure he knew what he was doing. I had no idea what he was doing. So we had a really good chat just about like the workplace and in particular the data challenges that a lot of these companies had. And that, I should say, like is still in the big equalizer. Like the delivery of experience in space has a lot to do with technology, and our authority around how we design space is fueled by a totally insane amount of information, research and machine learning, because we have like it benefits our business to be able to take all of like the manual work out of it. You know, we want buildings to be able to be laid out automatically. We're already sort of doing that a little bit. You know, how many of what goes into a building and roughly where it should be is fueled by sales data, booking data, feedback data, tickets, like all this put into a big black box and spit out the other end, and constantly learning. So there's a huge amount of tech going on, and my background was very compelling, I think, for the person that I met with. Being a practitioner, so I've like lived in a real estate function and having to push people to change on the inside, understanding the nature of like mobility in particular, both in the office and between offices, and the technology required to do all of it. So at the end of the meeting, I kind of was like, you know, is there anything I can do for you? Like, can I sell you advice? And he was like, how about you come work here? And then which I said, that's nuts. Like, you guys don't hire grown-ups. Because I didn't, everyone in the office I saw was like 12 to me anyway. But then on the way out, I actually ran into somebody that I knew who had like formerly been at a bank, and kind of explained to me these new ventures around large companies, and that convinced me to explore it further. And a couple months later, here I was. But it was basically on character reference and my hands-on experience on the occupier side, where they had no one here who could look like another large company real estate person in the face and say, I've been in your shoes. But it was a totally wild process from like my previous experience.
So I just, if you could, you have 2 or 3 pieces of advice you might give the students, either about school or post-school?
Yeah, sure. I don't know to what extent like agile development processes are being pitched at Washington now. Dante, maybe you probably know better than them.
I would say not very much. Anybody familiar with Agile in the lens of classes you're taking? That's a big no.
What about like the waterfall model? Does that mean anything? You guys are so young, though.
Yeah, and these are a lot of the first year students that they haven't even gotten the project management classes.
Yeah. So here's my advice. When I went, my later classes, this is not a 101, 102 kind of thing. At some point, someone will try to tell, well, 2 things. One, I would, to the extent that you have any interest in doing anything in technology, in like a professional setting, find a way of taking a course that teaches you about how technology projects actually happen in the real world. But the thing that's happening right now is a major departure from the thing I was taught to the way things are getting done in every cool company that you can think of out there. And a lot of not cool companies that are waking up and having this holy crap moment about what all the cool companies are doing. And it's basically the difference between, way over planning. Like you meet with your client. Hey, you want me to build you a piece of software that like does something? I go into a vacuum for the next 6 months of gathering requirements and writing 50-page documents and making sure everything is super perfect. And then I start and I do stuff in long increments, and I don't even go back to the client to show them anything for like months on end. When at that point, it's probably too late, costs too much, and you haven't delivered anything they had in mind at the beginning and haven't factored in anything that might have changed in their mind since then. Like that worked a long time ago. It doesn't work now. So there was a manifesto of sorts written a few years ago. If you go to Google the like Agile manifesto, you will find it. That explains like the old way is down. No one ever gets a development project right over long periods in terms of the requirements and the schedule, like and the cost. Something always has to give. So why don't we try a different approach where we fix two of those three things, being sort of the schedule and the resources, and we allow the what gets accomplished to float. So it shifts you into a mindset of like 2-week, what are called sprints. And like beginning of the 2-week process, you're meeting with the person that, you know, who owns sort of the idea, prioritizing what it is you're going to do, going into a 2-week, like very typically very dedicated burst of energy from people who are doing nothing else but working on whatever you're building, with a lot of like very regular cadences in the middle. Most commonly like daily meetings, checking in. What are you working on? What am I working on? Do you have any problems? How do I like lift barriers? So that at the end of the 2 weeks, you can like stop, take a breath, and actually deliver something to your client, which may not be perfect. That's the whole idea. Like perfect is the enemy of the good. Like you say, hey, 2 weeks, we've like moved the needle forward. We built one feature out of the 10 that we want to know, but we can actually show it to you and have a moment to say like, should we keep going on that or like move on to the next thing, or have your priorities changed entirely? So hopefully by the end of the same year you were going to spend, you actually have like a demonstrably better product because you've been checking in all along the way. You've been able to control for changes all along the way. You've been people focusing in much better together, with like much higher visualization of the process. Like all around it's better. And every like unhip, boring company that we encounter is like waking up to this now. A lot of the cool kid companies, the high-tech companies, startups, like they all figured this out a couple of years ago. But there's a real phase shift that's happening around technology development towards this way of like managing work. But we're also seeing it creep into non-technology sides of the business. Like our marketing people are using a very similar framework to work on some 6-month like marketing objective of theirs. It's being chunked down into work and done in a much more flexible fashion than before. So that, let's say, is one piece of piece of advice. And the second one would be like, I guess I could take a data science course is one, but don't underestimate the impact or power of like hands-on experience trying to build something yourself. In particular, like I said, for me, it was like building a server, which was never something I thought I was interested in, forced me to understand a lot about application and network architectures that I was not taught in any course. Dante, I don't know if you like agree with that. Generally.
Yeah, no, that's definitely taught a little bit in the rapid prototyping class. They have a rapid prototyping class now. Where they spin up Amazon instances.
Yeah, that's the new way.
Right. But yeah, there's still quite a bit lacking in terms of actual command line experience. So operating systems and this 361, the systems class, are the only two that deal with it, and it's really just in the lens of the project. So if you don't take one of those classes, you kind of miss out on it.
Yeah, but like data is the new hotness. So like anyone coming out with either data science experience or just full on like someone saying, no, we could probably figure out some problem or what we could do next, but the data set that we have is 10 billion lines of data. As long as your reaction to that is like, oh, that's not so bad. Like I'm not afraid of that scale, or I know how to sift and sort and visualize, and even if it's not like machine learning craziness, just basic data visualization and parsing and is like a non-negotiable skill now.
And actually, Phil, if I could even make this example simpler, pivot tables in Excel. Even today, I was talking with one of my coworkers who's a developer, and he wanted to take a bunch of data that had descriptions and hours for projects worked and the projects repeated, and he wanted to sum that up so we could say per project how much time spent. So if you haven't looked at pivot tables in Excel, which I know doesn't sound terribly exciting, but very powerful and really can help you take raw data quickly and make information out of it.
Yeah, pivot data is an actually something else that like computer science taught me. Most computer scientists can do really sneaky stuff with Excel, like not even macros or any of that craziness, just like basic string processing and if-then statements, which are like very simple parts of the Excel language, but only someone who has spent time actually developing would ever like think about really creative ways of manipulating information in Excel to then let you do what Dante described, like pivoted to get very far, very fast, without a lot of like complicated tools. The more, the probably most popular and commercially adopted advanced analysis tool that we run into a lot is a tool called Tableau, which is freaking amazing, and I think free if you're a student.
It's definitely not free if you're not a student. It is super expensive.
Super expensive, but is the most popular tool by a landslide that I run into here and with clients. What else? There's two other little like facts I didn't mention about WeWork that may be interesting, but if there's another question, I'll take it first.
How do you like adapt to new technologies and trends? How do you keep yourself learning?
Me personally?
Yeah.
I mean, I keep learning, I guess, is the short answer. Like, I at least have a tolerance for trying to pay attention and try to be conversant enough to know what I'm talking about. But thankfully here, there's like an army of technologists. You know, we just hired the guy who was running like natural language processing at Amazon to figure out how to mine out like what people are really saying when they submit support tickets. Like, God bless it to be somebody who is as freaking smart as that guy, that I don't have to think about it. But I stay plugged into like, you know, technical blogs and just like sign up for every technical newsletter here that most people out of our tech groups don't read, but I just like to at least know what's going on, because I can I don't have to be the executor, but I can connect the technical people to those that are more on the business side that would never know about them and be like, there's some magic that can happen here. So my role now, like years away from it, is to connect people with ideas or problems and capabilities instead of doing it myself.
Any other questions for Phil?
So should I share my last? Are you trying to wrap up at 10 of, or you want me to share the last two things?
We can wrap up if you don't have anything else.
Well, I should share too, so like, I encourage you to look up WeWork. It's much more than space for us, actually. A lot of what we're doing, when I said we're trying to, our official mission statement is to build a world. We're trying to help people build a world where you can make a life and not just a living. And that has a lot to do with like what you do when you're not working and when you need to continue learning. So actually, as it's relevant to you, we actually have now bought two different companies, the larger of the two called Flatiron, which is a coding boot camp like company. Their whole thing is 3 months intensive programs for people who were never developers and like want to change their career later in life. And they have like a 97 or 8% success rate placing people into jobs afterwards who go through the program, like do coaching and everything. And are so confident in it that people that don't get a job in whatever 6 month period, they actually give them their tuition back. And that's also allowed us to take programs with certain companies and cities to allow like people who can't afford the class to go through it and only start paying back, you know, once they've finished and gotten a job. And I say that because it's like, it is really challenging what it means to like have continuing education. The the founder of that company, says a lot like, we believe in continuing education, we believe in constant learning. That doesn't necessarily mean that college is like right for or available to everyone. And in technical training, like that is probably the most of it, but in a lot of other industries, we're starting to see more and more of that happening, which is good because it's going to be available to you like when you graduate. And there's still absolutely something that you get with a 4-year degree that you don't get with those, especially in terms of access to jobs now. But like that's part of our ecosystem and the delivery of technical training to these large companies and trying to build a wider net so people can like get access to these industries. And the connection for us with space is like we give the school physical space and we give the members access to this whole ecosystem of spaces around the world to meet their potential like future employer and network, all while they're actually still studying. So it's pretty amazing. And then on the purely like able to do what you're passionate about when you're not working. I know no one has like really heard of WeWork. Anybody heard of Meetup?
You say Meetup?
No, Meetup.
Meetup. Yes, Meetup. Yeah.
Meetup.
Yep, got some head shakes. Yep.
Some head shaking. Yes, Meetup. Largest community in the world of using the internet to get off of the internet. They have like 40 million users and 250,000 people who volunteer their time to like get special interest groups together. We bought them a year ago. So if you've ever attended a WeWork meetup anywhere, thank you. You are a WeWork member in your own special way. And that all happened because in large part, we found out if you're organizing a group that's really into like coding or photography or art or whatever it is you get people together to talk about, shy of like running groups where obviously you're going out like into the park. The hardest thing as an organizer of any event anywhere is physical space. We have a lot of it and we try to activate it. And we were finding out that all over the world, meetup organizers were actually choosing WeWork to like host their meetup because they found the spaces to be cool and like available and the members to be great and et cetera, et cetera. So we bought them, which is amazing. And we're looking for all sorts of new and exciting ways to like integrate what they know. Again, this is a data thing about what topics are of interest to whom, where, all over the world is a really valuable piece of information for us in the events that we operate, and also like the companies effectively will pay us for over time, we think, to tell them where the cool kids are and like what people are doing. So yeah, it's a much bigger than that than just space. It'd be a whole like another hour-long conversation, but I encourage you to check us out because it can definitely be used as a networking mechanism. Because of all the companies that are in our space. We are not open in St. Louis yet. That might be like a 2019 or 2020 event. So that would benefit you by graduation. But anywhere else you are, odds are we're there too if it's a tier 1 city. Tier 1 and 2.
Great.
Cool.
Well, Phil, thank you so much for your time and enjoy the rest of your cold evening.
Yeah, Dante knows how to find me. So if you have any questions, like I'm here.
Yep.
Cool.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Good luck, everyone.
Thanks, Will.
Wow.